With all the flow-through cans that have hit the market, is HUXWRX still the king with flow-through? Let's find out. Okay guys, so you saw the opening montage, and that means that today we are reviewing a 5.56 and a 7.62 HUXWRX Flow TI can. Now, HUXWRX actually started in 2009 as OSS, and over the years they did a ton of laboratory testing on toxic blowback from traditional baffle stack style silencers. And in 2020, they actually confirmed a ton of just negative consequences to having a traditional baffle stack can over prolonged periods of time. And in 2021, they actually became HUXWRX as we know them today and revolutionized the evolution of silencers with their 3D printed flow-through cans. So these things are both quiet and they have very low back pressure, which used to not be the case. One was you either had to have low back pressure and it was really loud at the muzzle, or you had to have high back pressure, but you got all that gas in the face. So let's shoot a couple of these and see how they stack up. Ha, no pun intended. Now, you do see a tiny bit coming out of the scar because they are very gassy, but I don't notice any of it or smell any of it as I'm shooting. And you don't want to hear how this sounds unsuppressed if you're standing beside me because it's incredibly loud. So let's see what that one looks like. Okay, so now we have the Sons of Liberty Gunworks Mark I, which is not a scam, and the HUXWRX 5.56 Ti. Nothing, and I think that video should show quite a difference in how much gas is coming out of that ejection port. So let's actually also see this one without a can, just so you see how much this actually suppresses from unsuppressed. So let's talk about HUXWRX for a minute as a company. So they started in 2009 under a different name called OSS, and they were making some crazy silencers that did resemble what they have today, but because of the manufacturing limitations at the time of traditional subtraction manufacturing, they were making their cans in multiple parts. And in 2020, they actually did a ton of laboratory research, and in their findings, they actually found that compared to the HUXWRX technology and their flow-through technology, that traditionally baffled cans were actually producing around 265% more toxic gas to the shooter. And I know what a lot of people are probably saying because I've heard it before. What's the big deal? Well, a lot of those gases are composed of carbon monoxide, hydrogen cyanide, and ammonia, which all in even somewhat small doses, but in general over time, can cause a lot of severe illnesses and diseases. So they saw a massive opportunity in the industry to then rebrand and become HUXWRX as we know it in 2021 and begin tackling the massive issue of back pressure and toxic gas and just hazards to the shooter themselves. And so before we go any further, let's talk about what a traditional baffle stack style can is. So imagine you take this silencer as an example. So imagine this tube, but inside would be sort of modified washers or basically dividers inside of the can that allows the gas that goes through this to slow down, cool, and expand, all culminating in less sound at the muzzle, so creating suppression. Now, this is pretty cool technology because with HUXWRX's patented flow technology, they have a different approach. So we actually have a cutaway of a Flow 5.56, and this thing internally is wild. So on this sort of outside path, this first layer, you can see a bunch of helical pathways for gas to flow through, as well as internally a couple of different reverse pathways that gas continues to get directed through various channels, and even a third one right there. And when you get to the far component, you actually can see, so all of those helix channels are right here. So you have a bunch of different layers of gas path and gas travel. You got your blast chamber right here that allows all of that gas to start expanding around the outside. And then through the silencer, you have what I would imagine are or describe as sort of asymmetrical baffles that just trap whatever gas comes through directly behind the bullet. And you can see all of those pathways lead to all of their openings in the front of their cans, as well as the built-in flash hider. And so to keep it simple, what their cans are doing is taking all that pressure that typically starts right here in the front of the can and directing it to the outsides, allowing it places to keep moving and slowing down, so it does not create massive back pressure in the system. And with this design, they are creating a system that forces all of the gas forward and creates a low back pressure environment in front of it, so it pulls all that gas forward and ejects predominantly out of the front of this can instead of going back in the shooter's face. Okay, so now that we have a breakdown of those two different styles of manufacturing, what are the cons of traditionally baffled silencers? So when you are shooting a traditionally baffled silencer, you have a ton of pressure. Since all of these sort of dividers don't allow gas to go anywhere but through the center, you start basically getting something called gas stacking, and it increases the pressure. And as we know from physics, pressurized gas is going to take the path of least resistance. And if it can't exit quickly out of the muzzle because of the pressure, it's going to go backwards and back into the weapon system. So that is where all of the extra gas coming out of the ejection port comes from. It also makes your firearm that you're using this on a lot dirtier, as well as if you're running any full auto, traditionally baffled cans are going to speed up the firing rate of that weapon system and is just going to unduly wear the parts. It's really, really hard on that firearm. So with the flow-through technology, HUXWRX has designed a can that runs cleaner, is significantly easier on your weapon system, and you're not getting all the nasty toxic fumes back in your face, as well as being quiet. So in the past, when low back pressure or flow-through style cans were becoming a thing, they just did not have access to the technology like 3D printing that we have today, which just creates way more complex and high-performing internals for silencers than we have ever had. So let's actually talk about the performance of these two cans. Now, you've seen some of the footage on the range. We obviously shot both of these on a Sons of Liberty Mark I, as well as on a SCAR 17 with and without these silencers. I have to tell you, shooting the Mark I indoors without a silencer wasn't awful. Definitely kind of feel it in your chest. But shooting the SCAR unsuppressed was quite a beast. It definitely has a lot of recoil. It's incredibly loud. And when you put both of these cans on those particular firearms, it is a world of difference, especially, honestly, the SCAR. The SCAR is the one that I noticed the most difference with, just in how much it tames recoil, but just gets rid entirely of the concussiveness and the massive fireball that I feel like comes out of a SCAR when you're shooting it with one of these muzzle devices on there. Obviously, shooting the 5.56, that sounded incredible as well, but 5.56 just doesn't recoil as much as a standard, so you don't really notice a ton of difference there, but obviously can run it really, really fast, and I don't start getting that gas stacking where, you know, you have tons and tons of gas coming out the ejection port. So with tons of strings of fire that had a lot of rounds per string, I never really felt any gas or smelled any gas in my face, so clearly their technology works in that regard. And speaking of performance, obviously the question is going to come up, since there are so many other low back pressure cans that currently exist, how do these stack up? So with both of these cans, they are coming in at extremely high performance. Where they sit in the competition with other silencer manufacturers, a large number of them are coming in with the same suppression as the HUXWRX cans, but around 2 to 3 inches longer. So they're needing a lot more space for gas to cool and slow down and expand before they're getting the same suppression that comes out of these HUXWRX cans, which is ultra, ultra impressive. It clearly shows the high performance of their internals, and it just makes shooting suppressed that much more pleasurable and fun. So, is HUXWRX still the king of flow-through? Well, in an industry that spent years discovering that back pressure in silencers matters, HUXWRX built an entire company on that concept back in 2009 when everyone thought they were crazy, but they're still here. They are performing at the absolute top of their classes in caliber, and they started a silencer revolution. So with that said, is HUXWRX still the king of flow-through? If nothing else, they're sitting right at the top. And as always, if you like this video, like it, subscribe because it helps the channel out. And as always, we'll see you on the range.